Good morning. Good morning and good Sunday. I hope this new day finds you well. My name is Reverend Leon Dunkley, and I will be your service coordinator this morning. Our service is being delivered by someone with a clearer voice than mine, by Taylor Barnes, who's behind me, and her family's here with her today. Tatum is here for the children. If there's anybody who's new to North Chapel, I invite you to sign the book at the back of the sanctuary so that we can keep in touch with you as we move forward in time. If you'd like to, you can feel free to raise your hand and introduce yourself, or if not, we can just go ahead and move on. I wanted to begin this morning with before we get to announcements, with a poem. I watched all of the Carter services in the President Jimmy Carter services in the National Cathedral this last week, and I was struck by how beautiful it was, and I was struck by how committed he was to his Christian faith, and it brought a poem to mind that I found in a book by Joy Harjo. It's called "This Morning I Pray for My Enemies," and it goes like this. And whom do I call my enemy? My enemy must be worthy of engagement. I turn in the direction of the sun and keep walking. It's the heart that asks questions, not the furious mind. The heart is the smaller cousin of the sun. It sees and knows everything. It sees and knows everything. It hears the gnashing even as it hears the blessing. The door to the mind should open only from the heart. An enemy who gets in risks the danger of becoming a friend. This morning there are a series of announcements. I invite you to look to your order of service, but there are going to be a couple of special announcements. I'll make a few myself, and then I'll invite Mary up and whoever else may have one. In 2 weeks, on January the 26th, a dear friend of mine and a world-traveling musician named Dana Kurtz will be coming to join us for the service. It's a very, very special service. She's a spectacular musician, singer-songwriter. She's the best singer-songwriter I know, and I know a lot of them. I'll save the stories for then, but she's a lifelong friend, and I met her in the youth group at my Unitarian Universalist church when I was 15 years old. It's about 25 years ago. No, I'm kidding. About 45 years ago. So please mark in your calendar for January 26th that we'll be joined by Dana Kurtz. Yeah, and then I'll invite Mary to come on up.
Good morning. January 26th is also our annual meeting in Potluck.
Yes.
So put in a plug. So in your order of service, there are two announcements one is about the quilt and the raffle, and I will be here for a little bit after church and then down at coffee hour with raffle tickets, so please come see me for that. And then on Tuesday, we usually just have the committee cafe, but we're combining it, as you see in your program, with the pasta dinner. And this is a chance you don't have to be on a committee. This is a chance for you to come and learn. So we invite everybody to come and just hear what we're all about. So hope to see you then. Thanks.
Mary preempted me, but I'm a church geek, and my favorite event is annual meeting. Annual meeting is really like where I see the church kind of showing up to be itself and to become itself and to think about what it wants to become into the future. So I'm a big fan of annual meeting. I'm gonna pump annual meeting next week and then the week after that. But gear up because it's the best part of the deal. Lastly, I wanna say, let us hold our hearts open wide for these days that are challenging days. for these nights that are super cold nights sometimes, and for really cute kids who walk in the door. Please settle in, please be seated. Please take this time to silence whatever cell phone or buzz, whatever you might have that buzzes and whirs, so that we can be focused here together on this Sunday morning. One of the things that I noticed at the Carter celebration was I was reminded of the fact that Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House, mindful of the coming energy crisis. So back in the 70s, he put solar panels on the roof of the White House. Reagan took them off in favor of the oil companies when he was elected a few years later. But Jimmy Carter did something that wasn't popular at the time. Something that is becoming more and more popular. Even in the Republican Party, there's a story of the woman in Atlanta who was the head of the Sierra Club. She was also the head of the Republican Party in that area of the world. And she was contacted by higher ups in the Republican organization so as to properly represent the party platform in that area. They had noticed that she had bought these solar panels and they were on her roof, and that the solar panels were discontinuous with the petroleum agenda inside of the party. She was also the head of the Tea Party in the area, so it was kind of a powerful conflict. So she renamed her title, and she became the president of the Green Tea Party in that area, and kept the solar panels on her roof. Doing what was right and what was true to Jimmy Carter's heart was something that was important, but it left him vulnerable to attacks from the right. It left him vulnerable to attacks from the left, but it never left him vulnerable to reprisals from his faith. It never compromised his integrity. His grandson Jason said that the man that he saw in the White House was absolutely consistent with the man that he saw at the breakfast table. He said that there was no difference between the two. He said he was a man of integrity. As we move into this time of meditation, let's think about what integrity might mean to us today.
Thank you all for being here today. I'm also very grateful to be here today. Been looking forward to sharing a reflection for a while now, and I'm especially grateful that I made it through a very difficult and busy week. I've been commuting to Burlington 3 days this past week for a dance festival, including in a snowstorm on Thursday when I started to slide off of the exit from the highway into Burlington. And I don't think I was at risk of any serious catastrophe, but still very scary, as somebody who's not the most confident driver. So anyway, I made it here, and I have a bit of a story I'd like to share. Some of my earliest memories are of dancing. Both my parents are dancers who met during a show, so I guess that makes sense. When I was 3 years old, I had my first ballet recital, and after weeks or maybe even months of classes, my relatives assembled in the audience, camera ready to record the routine. I remember how we lined up and walked out onto the stage past the thick rolls of red folded curtain. I remember the warm, bright lights and how we started standing together with our hands on our hips. At the time, I don't know if I remembered the choreography or not. Family legend has it that I made up my own dance, and somewhere in a time capsule of forgotten technology, there exists video evidence. At some point, the curtain closed, and as the story goes, the audience roared in good-natured laughter, while my dance teacher, bless her heart, was less than enthusiastic. And that's okay. How could she understand? She didn't see what I saw, the way the music curled around the room, changing shapes and blending colors. It was like when I ran around the living room rug to the sound that peeled off my parents' record player, the rhythm rising in my own orbit, painting the paisley rug into a kaleidoscopic centrifuge of a stage. For me, the texture inherent in movement and the movement inherent in music meant that dance was both intuitive and, I would later find, inherently synesthetic. The first time I heard that word, synesthesia, I was 11 years old. There was a feature story on the evening news about a strange neurological disorder that caused some people to see letters and numbers in color or visualize the days of the week out in space ahead of them, or smell sounds, or taste music, or any other number of unique sensory pairings. From the Greek for union of the senses, synesthesia refers to a consistent sensory experience related to one sense or part of the body, activated by consistent stimulation of another sense or part of the body. I hadn't realized there was a category for my perceptual experience. Grapheme synesthesia, to be specific, is when numbers, letters, or words always appear in the same color in someone's sensory landscape. For me, that landscape exists as a midnight blue 3D mental screen, an internal cosmos in all directions. When someone says their phone number, or I write a list of words, I see each number or letter projected onto the screen in its own unique color, each and every time. Until that night I saw the news segment, it never occurred to me that others experienced numbers and letters in totally different colors, or perhaps even not at all. I grew up feeling different for more reasons than I understood at the time. I was introverted, biracial, and poor in a predominantly white upper middle class school district where popularity was an emergent property of money, athletics, and social fortitude. I fit in just enough to avoid being othered overtly, but microaggressions, you don't really seem Black, and mocking my family's cheap cars were not lacking in the least. Water break. With the exception of geometry, which was like visual philosophy with a side of linguistics, I struggled in STEM classes but succeeded in the humanities. I was a quirky editor-in-chief of the high school newspaper who wore whimsical clothes, had a journalism internship, and dropped AP biology to double up on English classes at the start of my senior year. In being public about my synesthesia, I could access the coveted, I'm weird but in a cool way, brand of teenage persona. Yet it felt urgent and crucial that I indicate my perceptual differences to share some deeper truth about myself. Through tenacious hyperfocus to the point of academic research and an undergraduate thesis on the subject, I made learning about synesthesia my personal side hustle without the paycheck. In college, I studied English, philosophy, and narrative perspective. My passion here continues to be synesthetic literary figures and multidimensional narrative structures, in which an array of characters or unexpected characters like inanimate objects collectively inform a story from different angles. It's not unlike how multiple senses inform our experience of life. As I aged and became more metacognitively embodied, I realized that my experience of synesthesia, and perhaps synesthesia as an entity itself, was not necessarily confined to the realm of one-to-one sensory pairings. Rather, it traced the shape of a multi-dimensional way of existing in a sensory world, sensing new dimensions of congruency, symmetry, and elegance, or truth, goodness, and beauty. Yes, the number 3 is always my favorite cerulean blue, and vowels are some type of yellow beige. But a song might carry a different texture or produce a unique set of brushstrokes through a space from one day to the next, depending on a number of factors, like how tired I am, or the temperature of the studio or the car, or what objects are in the room, or how many people are dancing with me. Where music is concerned, I can see more color in an emptier space. Similarly, it's not that all loud noises are physically painful, but shrill sounds and sudden blasts that expand or repeat in quick succession are particularly destabilizing. A high volume bass doesn't bother me, but an ambulance or a fire alarm or car muffler are an entirely different story. While I was doing all that research in college, some of the most interesting nuances I learned about synesthesia are: 1, among grapheme synesthetes, light gray is the most common color for 0, and like a charcoal gray, almost black, is most common for 1. And also that unborn babies and infants experience intermingled senses, and these neural connections typically are pruned away in coming years as people age, narrow their focus, and gain cognitive speed. We all start as synesthetes, and some of us stay that way. I believe this amalgamated sensory foundation is why language is peppered with synesthetic references we've simply come to understand as metaphor or flowery speech. Think about loud shirts or sharp notes or a cold shoulder, even warm and cool colors. As a 3-year-old improvising at her first dance recital, I was a lot closer to that undifferentiated lens of life, more fluidity in body and mind, than I experienced as an older child, teen, and young adult. I was moved by raw curiosity and joy rather than desire for conformity or even belonging. Fast forward a few short years later, I didn't want to wear jeans or side ponytails because nobody at school did, and I was asking to be called Taylor so that my name ended in an E sound like Ashley, Angie, Katie, Courtney, and all the other girls I knew. By this point, I had resumed dance classes, now in a more formal capacity. I started with tap, then added jazz and ballet each year in succession. This, I learned, is actually the opposite of what most young girls were doing, starting with ballet first, usually. Maybe I knew instinctually, but ballet has always been the most challenging for me. In 5th grade, I was moved from my age group to be in a younger ballet class due to my inability to map movements onto my body. That was my last full year of dance lessons and recitals. The older I was, the more complex the choreography and the more challenging to learn and remember at the same pace as my peers. Whatever synesthesia gave me did not work in reverse. Some equations are one-way streets. To be honest, I don't have a lot of embodied or somatic memories from my teen and college chapters. I lived in my mind, avoiding awkwardness, or trying to, and collecting academic accolades. I wanted to be as invulnerable as possible, which meant going to a great college and getting a great job, like a journalist or a professor, and ensuring my safety, happiness, and relevance. For years, I never danced. Then, Sometimes there were moments that sparked some creative memory, a Zumba class or concert with my mom while visiting my hometown, a college party, or the opportunity to participate in ballet, modern, and various dance workshops on campus. After my senior year, I landed exactly the kind of job I sought out. In New York City, well-paying, well-meaning, or so I thought, and even had the word success in the title. The details are a story for another time, but for context, I stayed 4 weeks in that position and 5 months total in the city. The stage I had set, the life I had idealized, and the allegiances I deemed necessary for socio-financial survival were melting in my hands. Some of the scariest experiences of my life would be how I got lost within the maze between the front door and the subway, or between one train and the next, or within the building where we were supposed to meet by 7 a.m. each morning. It felt like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't integrate the choreography fast enough to keep pace with the other dancers, to follow along in space, or to learn in time. I couldn't map the movements onto my body and respond to the whims of the city's rhythm. Beyond directional navigation, I struggled to read the social cues around me, like whether someone was being sarcastic, disingenuous, or trying to pull off a scam. The visible material excess was startling. Often I was distracted by endless piles of free stuff that dotted the streets like treasures on an overcrowded map. Everywhere I saw potential for upcycling, for art. Between found objects, thrift stores, and street vendors, it was hard to develop the boundaries necessary to stay focused in such an overwhelming environment. When I first imagined living in New York, I thought I would buy an apartment instead of rent one because I heard buying was more economical in the long run. As if there were 2 equally accessible tracks ahead and it was up to me to choose what was most convenient. Later, it hadn't occurred to me that my landlord wouldn't appreciate the newspaper collage I wallpapered over the kitchen counter. I was 22. After several brief months living alone in New York City, I traced a path back to my hometown and back to my college town, where I both worked at my college and met my husband Tatum, who happened to be from Brooklyn. We lived there together for several years while he finished grad school and worked as a teacher, and I pieced together a series of gigs, including freelance writer and social media manager, home organizing consultant, substitute teacher, administrative assistant, and waitress. When I had the opportunity, and not all at the same time, some overlap. When I had the opportunity and funds, I would take a dance class, and soon I learned that improv was my favorite. I learned intuitively from watching other dancers, and without the expectation of linear memory, there were new dimensions of movement available, new degrees of freedom. In my last full year living in Brooklyn, I was accepted into an emerging artist program where I learned from brilliant facilitators, collaborated and improvised with my cohort on performance prompts, and developed my first solo work in narrative movement, which is what I call layering dance with spoken or recorded poetry. The night of that performance in July 2019 was life-changing. I received a lot of encouraging feedback on my work in progress dance piece, and I also received an email that evening with some very hopeful news. After a year on a wait list, I was next to move forward with evaluation. 3 months and several dozen hours of tests and paperwork later, I learned at age 29 that I am actually autistic, and I had been for my entire life. At that point, I had suspected as much. In over 2 years leading up to that final and official confirmation, I had put plenty of pieces together. As a child, I was hyperlexic, taught myself to read early, and didn't like certain words because their sounds felt rough or too abrupt. I couldn't stand the texture of my socks, cotton balls, or towels when my hands were too pruned after a bath. I would cover my eyes whenever we passed Kmart because the K was the wrong color. Hello, synesthesia. A higher percentage of autistics are actually synesthetes compared to the general population. Somehow, instinctively, I always knew the numerical order of all 26 letters in the alphabet. I seldom remember people's names on the first go, and I have no idea how people recognize celebrities in movies or TV shows. I always thought maybe there should be like flashcards for your classmates or stuff. But I could tell you all the shoes I'd ever owned or what my classmates wore for picture day last year. I have a hard time distinguishing between people's faces and recognizing them in different contexts. My special interests or deep cycles include researching the 1920s and 30s for hours, obviously like dance. I really love learning about Nikola Tesla. I'm kind of obsessed with Pekingese dogs, things like that. I don't often recognize I'm hungry until I start eating. If you tell me logistical things, I need to take breaks from eye contact so I can encode what you're saying. I'm a dancer who needs to build in extra time to learn choreography with additional repetitions, slowed down video, and other accommodations. I can't drive in most cities or on most highways, except in Vermont, which is awesome, unless it's snowing. It wasn't just anxiety, and I wasn't just quirky. Yet, despite my introspection, a series of online questionnaires, and plenty of reading on autistic women's nuanced experiences in socialization, masking, and neurotypical passing, I thought maybe I wouldn't measure up to the official diagnostic criteria for autism. Do I count? Am I autistic enough? It echoed the musings of my youth. Am I black enough? Am I white enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I smart enough? And then, as I was riding the subway homeward after that final meeting, paperwork in hand that indicated I was not only autistic but multiply neurodivergent, another story for another time, my insecurities shifted. Will anyone believe me? Since that day, I've had my reality doubted in the name of complimenting my normalcy. You don't look autistic. Isn't everyone a little autistic? Why are there so many autistic people these days? Sometimes I would keep on talking right after I came out so people don't have the opportunity or preemptively explain, justify, and prove myself. I have learned only to talk about my neurotype in one of three formats: presentation, written commentary, or in person with people who feel safe. I'm sure you've heard lots of things about autism, and I won't guess them all here. Nor will I speak for autistic people as a monolith or prioritize speaking at all. Non-speaking autistic writers, artists, and scholars exist, as do non-speakers who are none of these things. As do autistic adults, parents, teachers, preachers, doctors, dancers, actors, lawyers, and college professors. Yes, we're out here, and we have been all along. Now, we're in the media. Now, diagnosis is sometimes more accessible to people beyond school-aged, white, upper-middle-class boys on whom most initial autism research is based. Now we're abandoning functioning labels, forced first-person language, unless you choose it, and symbols that don't serve us. We're connecting the dots between autistic self-advocacy, disability justice broadly, and collective liberation universally. I believe that both positive racial self-concept and positive neurodivergent self-concept can be built through representation, identification, and engagement with peers, mentors, and community. Many women, girls, and non-binary people have been missed as autistic or misdiagnosed otherwise in their youth due to stereotypes about autism and the inaccessibility of diagnosis. Systemic inequity has left people of color, and poor people especially, out of this equation. Within neurodivergent communities, self-diagnosis is commonly accepted. According to a Psychology Today article from March of last year, the suicide rate for autistic adults is 3 times the neurotypical population. Other studies show that the risk of death by suicide is even greater for autistic people who are not intellectually disabled, and that autistic women are 13 times more likely than non-autistic women to die by suicide. I take it back. Here I will speak for autistic folks, who are often invisibly disabled in a world that largely is not built for us. We are exhausted. So, how did I get from Brooklyn to the Upper Valley? The short answer is a combination of necessity, strategy, privilege, and especially God's grace. I'm still learning, over 5 years since officially acknowledging my neurodivergence, how to build accommodations into my life to protect my peace, boundaries, and capacity. In neurodivergent, disabled, and chronically ill communities, we refer to this as our spoons. Spoon theory was developed by Christine Miserandino, an American writer with lupus, to explain how each spoon represents a unit of energy, and with a finite number of spoons each day, we need to make calculated decisions about what we engage in and commit to day to day and week to week. I'm learning to say no. From only choosing fabrics that feel comfortable to saving space in my schedule for rest, joy, and free time. I'm learning to let myself move in the ways I want to, from improv dance to shaking out my wrists or twirling my hair if that feels meditative in the moment. From parenting to career trajectory, my life is not what I expected it to be as a high-achieving, low-income student many years ago, before I understood myself in this context. I'm not a charter school teacher in New York City, or a college professor, or a journalist at the New York Times. These goals are no longer mine, nor do I want them to be. Here and now, I'm an artist, a wife and mother, a writer, photographer, and collaborative steward, both in community and through our family's growing small business. Outside of my quest for conformity, I've discovered a deeper capacity for creativity. I'm finding a unique sense of belonging in the Vermont dance community, especially as an improviser and improv teacher. I believe that identifying and living as an artist is related to how you think and how you feel and intuit, which is foundational beyond experience or exposure or expertise. I believe that art, like synesthesia, allows us to move into dimensions of which we are not yet aware and reveal something new there. Of course, we can only do so if we refrain from projecting inflexible expectations onto the future, if we allow for improvisation, authenticity, and vulnerability as a new relational currency. I'm learning that vulnerability can only flow if we abolish shame internally and as a means of coercion. From decluttering the house to releasing bias and judgment, I am learning that liberation is often a subtractive process. In the Maori people's tradition, there is a word for autism that means in one's own time and space. It's time we respect each person's rhythms and coexist in space together. I'm standing here sharing my neurotype, much like I've shared about our family's recent loss through miscarriage, because I believe in the value of humility. In my faith tradition, the Christmas season, which we've just gone through, highlights the preciousness of the least of us through God's eyes. I'm unmasking and unlearning what is unkind. I'm a beginner, learning to love my neighbor. I'm learning to let go of projection, both on myself and others. I'm learning to pour my life into new wineskins and cherish the fruit within. Thank you all for making today possible.
Stand we now upon a threshold facing futures yet unknown, hearth behind us, wayside hostels built for those who knew wild roads. As we walk through these days, may we know the beauty of wild roads, snow-covered sometimes, scary sometimes, but may we know the ground beneath our tires, the earth beneath our feet, as we move forward, understanding one another, knowing ourselves in this beautiful and beloved community. May be so. Blessed be and amen.